Hey everyone, this is George, and I'm back with a new video. So today we're going to be talking about Powers of X, number 5 of 6. This issue is written by Jonathan Hickman, illustrated by R.B. Silva, and color design or color artist Marte Gracia. So this issue, I've actually read it again, and I'm still looking over it some more, and it's a little bit funny, but there are a lot of concepts in this issue. And I would say the whole series from Hickman with Powers of X, or Powers of 10 and House of X, and the concepts in these issues, especially in this particular issue, I'd say they're kind of high concepts, and I can't say that I fully grasp everything, but I'll do my best to understand these things. After reading this issue, I feel like I need to go and study up on some of these concepts, because Hickman really is planting a lot of seeds and playing the long game here. I read some of his stories before, and I really enjoy the concepts in the stories, but I feel here he takes it to another level, and we'll get some more of that a little bit later. But the issue starts out with XMen Year 1, and it's Professor Xavier talking with Forge about creating a specific machine. We know from the other issues that he's actually designing one of the more advanced models of the Cerebro, the one that should be able to allow for the transfer of intelligence and personality and basically the essence of a person. And it's really interesting here because Forge is discussing this, and Forge is really taking it seriously here, and he's an inventor. He can basically create anything he can think of. That's his mutant ability. And so when he's discussing with Charles, he's letting him know this is what we need, but we don't have any of that. And Charles explains that, well, we might have something. So he lets him know what they have, and Forge essentially lets him know, well, we can do this. I think one of the really interesting parts in this segment of the issue is the illustrations of Professor Xavier. They seem really ominous, kind of eerie. I'm not really sure if that's intentional or if that's just Professor X, but throughout this whole series, Professor X has kind of been portrayed as somebody who's he's not the same Professor X that we know and love. He's kind of different. He's very edgy. And this segment ends with him asking Forge, are you going to build it for me or not? It's somewhat ominous because this doesn't seem like the Xavier that we know, especially if this is set, I believe, in the past. It just doesn't seem like the Xavier that we know, but it is tying into everything, and this is building on everything that we know so far. And so it's really interesting. The reason I mentioned the past, and we'll get to that later, is because it seems to jump from past, present to future in this issue. And I'll let you know once we get to those points. But that's where we start off with this issue, and it's really interesting. One of the other things that I really enjoy about these issues, and I think is really cool, is that with these issues, let's say we read a certain segment, you flip to the next page, and there's like these appendices where you see it talk about Cerebro. It says version 7.0, second build, functionality. I think this is really interesting. It's almost as if we're getting a glimpse into Jonathan Hickman's idea book, or where he jots down his notes, jotting out ideas for what to make his stories about. And I feel like that's what these are, that we're actually getting glimpses into it, but they're refined, so they pertain more to the story than they're just ideas. But one of the interesting things that I read here is that once a week Charles Xavier copies the latest version of every mutant to multiple redundant cradles located several locations across the world. So that's pretty interesting in and of itself, knowing how often he actually does this. But the other thing that I think is really interesting, and I don't know if they've actually given us an answer for this, but it's something that I want to know about. It says cradles, and it has quotations around them. So in my head, I'm thinking these might be like living beings, maybe clones of Professor X. I'm not sure what they are, but I feel like that's something that's going to be very important going forward, unless it's already been revealed and I missed it somehow. And so the next part of the issue, we jump to Year 10, the XMen Year 10. And we're here with Emma Frost. She's being approached by Professor X and Magneto, and they're essentially discussing their plans with her. And Emma's pretty upset when she finds out about it, because she's seen firsthand what happened the last time a lot of mutants gathered together on an island. She was actually there in the new X-Men issue where Cassandra Nova annihilated most of the mutant population. She was actually there. She survived because her secondary mutation manifested. But she's angry because she sees this as a return to that, basically putting a giant target on mutant kind's head. And so Magneto and Xavier, they both explain why it's not that, why it's going to work this time. And there's actually more to this. They need her for more, but they want to convince her first. And so we immediately jump to where Emma says that she is in, and she's going to do whatever she can to help them. And so that's when they let her know, that's when they drop the bombshell of what they really need. They need to have the Krakoan drugs distributed that they're kind of using to leverage humanity and the other nations. And so they're trying to use Emma and her Hellfire Club to do this because they already have international distribution abilities. And so that's why Emma is so important here. But one of the really interesting things that they bring into this is that they not only want Emma Frost on board, they want her to bring back Sebastian Shaw for this. And for those who aren't too sure, Sebastian Shaw is a classic X-Men character. He was once leader of the Hellfire Club during the era of the Phoenix Saga. So that's why he's so important. And then it actually ties into the next dependency because Xavier and Magneto mentioned that there's going to be this council of a certain number of mutants and that they want Emma for the council. And she has, as of now, she has 2 spots. And then after agreeing to do this, she negotiates for 3 spots. And so that's the next part that I think is really interesting because we get to that page. And so that council is called the Quiet Council of Krakoa. And I'll kind of go over the list here, and I kind of want to speculate a little bit about who I think could be on here because the names are blanked out of the people that we don't know who are actually on the council. So right now it's just me speculating about who most likely would be on this council. But there's 14 seats on this council. There's like these subtitles. There's Autumn, Winter, Spring, Summer, and Krakoa. These are the specific designations of, I guess, the council. So the Autumn designation has 3 seats, and we know 2 out of the 3. The first 2 are Professor X and Magneto, and I think that the third one could potentially most likely be Cyclops. The next one is Winter, and those are seats 4, 5, and 6. Those are all completely blanked out. So this one might be a little bit crazy, but I honestly feel like Apocalypse could be seat number 4. And then followed by Mr. Sinister, because we learned in one of the previous issues, I believe it was House of X or Powers of X, or House of X or Powers of 10, that Sinister has a pretty important mission. And I think that mission is so important, it might actually get him a seat onto this council. But at the same time, I'm not sure. I think Apocalypse stands a better chance, but just because I'm speculating right now, I'm going to go with Apocalypse, Sinister, and I'm trying to think who could be the next one. Maybe Exodus? I think possibly Exodus could be that third man. And we'll go ahead and leave it at that for now because I'm just speculating. The next subgroup is Spring, and these are the seats 7, 8, and 9. Number 7 is going to be Sebastian Shaw. Number 8 is Emma Frost, the White Queen. And if I had to guess, the 9th seat is blacked out, so I'm trying to think who would be. I think it's possible the 9th seat could go to Namor the Submariner, but we're going to talk more about that a little bit later because he does actually play a part in this issue, and it might affect his placement on this council once we get to that. So it's possible that it could not be him, but I think for him being such an important leader in the mutant world and just the Marvel universe in general, I think he actually should have a place on this council. But at the same time, once we discuss what happens with him and Professor Xavier, then you'll understand why at this time it's kind of unlikely that he's on this council. The next group is Summer, and they have 3 seats. They're all blacked out. And I want to assume that these are going to be X-Men, but at the same time, I feel like the impression that I'm getting from the issues from Professor Xavier is that this kind of supersedes the X-Men and goes beyond them. So I don't necessarily feel like the X-Men are going to occupy these seats. I mean, sure, Emma Frost is an X-Men and has served on the team, but they didn't recruit her for that specific reason. And so far, of the 14 spots that we know of, only 3 are occupied by X-Men, and we'll get to the last 2 and you'll understand why. So of these 3, the only one I've suggested so far could be Cyclops, also potentially having a seat. But of these 3 seats, 10, 11, and 12 for the Summer group, I think it could be, I'm trying to think, I'd like to assume that Wolverine would make it onto this group, but Wolverine's never been a decision maker when it comes to the comics. Like, Cyclops defers to him specifically, but when it comes to like team dynamics and strategy, it's usually not something that Wolverine's included in, and so that's why I don't think Wolverine would actually occupy this council, but I guess we're going to see soon enough. So I actually take it back. For Autumn, the 3rd seat I think is going to go to Moira, and so I think Summer is going to be maybe related to Summers. I know it's kind of like a dead shoe in Scott Summers, but I would say the Summer group, number 10 is going to be Cyclops, Number 11 is going to be Jean Grey the Phoenix. Number 12 is going to be Storm. And so that might be too on the nose, that might be a little bit too easy, but I actually think that's who it could be. Cyclops has always been very important. He led the suicide mission and he's now been resurrected. And Jean Grey, we know that she has so much potential. She's always been a very important character, a very powerful character. And so I think it would be a shoo-in for her, that she's important enough that they really want her on this council. And Storm is another leader of the X-Men. They've always valued her as a leader, and so that's why I think she'd occupy the 12th seat. And so Krakoa is the last subsection, and it seats 13 and 14. These are occupied by Cypher and Krakoa. So you know how I mentioned the only known X-Men? So Cypher is actually on this council, and I think the main reason he's on this council is because he needs to communicate with Krakoa, let Krakoa know what they need and why they need it, and so he's there to communicate with Krakoa. It might be revealed that he has some other importance to be on this council, but I think right now that's probably why he's included on this council. I just think that's a really cool thing, a cool special feature that I really love about Hickman's story so far, is that we get these appendices and they're really awesome to look at, and they're really interesting and they're fun to speculate about. So I'd actually love to know, who do you think fills out the rest of this council? It's okay if we have some of the same selections, because honestly I'm pretty sure that it is going to be some of these core people that we've discussed. But I'd love to know who you all think occupies the Quiet Council of Krakoa, especially if you have somebody who's out of left field. And so we're still in year 10. Professor X is reaching out across the world, inviting mutants to come to Krakoa. And we actually see him reaching out to a lot of the, seems like, villains right now. But here's where we get to Namor the Submariner. Remember, we talked about him a little bit earlier, so here's where we tie into him. So Xavier's reached out to Namor, and he's essentially inviting him to join Krakoa also, because for those who aren't familiar with Namor the Submariner, he's actually considered to be Marvel's first mutant. And so of this issue, I think this is maybe the most interesting interaction that we get. And so Charles is essentially trying to convince Namor, join us on Krakoa. And Namor, with the attitude that we know, Namor, he's always kind of had an attitude. He's always been his own, he's always done the lone wolf thing, and he doesn't run with crowds usually. But Namor here kind of rebuffs Charles, and he says no, he's kind of going to do his own thing. And so he comments about how Charles has finally seen that there isn't going to be any sort of coexistence in his eyes, and that humanity and mutant kind, they're just never going to mesh together. And Namor's kind of gloating a little bit about how, you know, you're finally seeing it, took you long enough. And he mentions they hate your superiority and they always will. And he's just going on about how it's not going to work between human and mutant kind coexistence. So we know that Namor believes this. Namor believes in his own superiority. Namor believes in them just never coexisting. But it sounds like he may not actually believe that Charles is actually fully on board with this. And he actually says, and do you actually think I believe that you feel that way too? And then he says, go away, little man, and don't come back until you really mean it. And I just thought that was a really interesting interaction. And of course, Namor's always been a complex character. And in this part, it's hard to determine if he's just being snarky and just kind of being difficult for the sake of being difficult, or if he actually has a point that maybe he really doesn't. Even though Namor might seem like he probably believes that there won't ever be actual coexistence between the two, that he just doesn't believe that Professor Xavier is fully on board with that. And so that's kind of how I interpreted this. I'd love to know what you all think, if you got the same impression or not. And so on the next page, we change to X Cubed, the year 1000. We see like a Phalanx spear. And so this part right here is probably the most confusing part. I don't know how this ties into everything, but I'm sure Hickman's going to wrap it up. I'm sure the light bulb's going to go off at the end of the series and we're like, oh, that's what they were hinting to. But right now, it introduces a lot of really high concepts that are kind of hard to grasp, especially when you're trying to determine how they play into the past events, why they're significant, why are we seeing this now. And so we see a Phalanx cube, and we see the Elder who wanted to join the Phalanx. He actually does get to, but we learn there's a catch. And instead of it being kind of like this happy union, what we end up learning is that the Phalanx consumed him, the Elder, and it's going to consume the rest of the planet. But essentially they are getting their wish, that they are going to live within the Phalanx as a part of the Phalanx. But in this issue, it seems like they didn't get what they were wanting actually, and that even though they might have got what they wanted, it's very different from what they expected, and it may have been more than they bargained for. And so that's the impression I got of here. But it talks about a lot of concepts here that I wish I could say I could speak about more confidently. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about this because it talks about the types of societies, universal societies. And there's a Titan society, a stronghold, a dominion, and there's more of these appendices. It goes into more detail on these, and it is really interesting. But again, these are kind of high concepts, and they can be tough to grasp, especially when you're trying to consider how this plays into the story as a whole. And unfortunately, I wish I could say I understand these well enough to convey them, but I gotta say I don't. And if I didn't need to get this review out as fast as possible because there's so many other people putting out these reviews, I would honestly love to take the time to do more research about these specific concepts. And I plan to, it just won't make it in time for this video. And so I didn't mention the first part, but I think these little comments are very important. The issue opens and ends with specific commentary from Professor X and ends with commentary from Namor. And so this first one's from Professor X. It says, "They will think we are doing one thing, but the truth is we are doing something altogether different." And then the quote at the end from Namor the Submariner is, "When you see me again, understand what that means." And so I'm really enjoying this series. If you watch my other video, I was kind of critical about it, and you can watch that and you can let me know if you agree or disagree with what I mentioned in there. But with the series as a whole, I really enjoy that Hickman is throwing all of this at us, that this series as a whole has a lot of rereadability, that this series really does have so many interesting concepts that it does take somebody like myself like 3 rereads to actually get a grasp of what's going on. And so we only get pieces of the puzzle here, and that's what I like about the story. We're kind of building to a bigger picture, and it's actually, what's really cool about one of the last pages is that it gives you the reading order. So this is Powers of X number 506, and we just have 2 more issues in House of X and Powers of 10. So House of X number 6 comes out October 2nd, 2019, and Powers of 10 number 6 comes out October 9th. We're going to know soon enough what all of this was about because these series are concluding very soon, so we don't have to wait that long to find out what the big picture is. But I really am enjoying these concepts and what Hickman's trying to do here. But at the same time, it is a very different X-Men. I've heard some people say that they feel like it's not the X-Men, and I can agree to an extent, but for the purposes of this issue and for how well of a writer Hickman is, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because he is a fantastic writer, and I think he's going to tie these things together, and there's going to be a kind of an explanation. But we'll know soon enough, and we'll know how much of this is going to tie into future X-Men series. And so honestly, I'd love to know what you all think. I really enjoyed the issue, and even though we're just getting pieces of the puzzle, like I said, it's building to a bigger picture. We're going to know soon enough, and I think everything's going to fit together. If you like comic book content, subscribe for more. Leave a like if you liked the video, share it if you loved it. I really hope y'all enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.